Welcome to the show on her throne, here where we believe that some leaders are just born women or female. And today in studio we have one such leader. Her name is Sharon Lindelwa, and she's going to be helping us to delve deeper into the issue of the link between business and politics. I'm your host Unika Kombora, welcoming you once again to another amazing episode of the show on her throne. Sharon, welcome.
Thank you so much. How are you, Unika?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
No, I'm doing well. Hectic morning, but okay, now we're here.
We're here now. So to people that might not necessarily know you, can you please introduce yourself, tell people more about you, your business, and what you do in life?
So Sharon Lindelwa is born and bred Kwablawayo. I went to missionary schools in Masawate in Solusi, both high school and tertiary, and from there I pursued finance. I actually wanted to be a lawyer, but we are here. I studied finance, and through me studying finance, I have my day job where I work as a financial analyst and handling the admin work. And then just before COVID hit, the financial grind. So financial grind is all about financial literacy and financial management, paying particular attention to your SMEs. Why SMEs? Because they contribute more than 60% of the GDP of the country, and they are people that are then not exposed to your financial services and products, and yet they are the backbone of the economy. So if we're able to empower them, equip them with the right skill to better their businesses and build their empire, who knows what a type of country we can build.
So she's already started hitting us with the statistics and the amazing information. So to delve right into it, yes. What is the link between business and politics?
Okay, it's inevitable for them to be, I feel like they're intertwined. You can't separate one from the other, because it's like what? The government and the state, it's one thing, you know. However, it's just different parts of a meal, for example. So it's your meal, it's different things, and they all contribute different things to the general ecosystem. And so at the end of the day, yes, at times there are clashes between business and politics, and at times one has to sort of like take one for the team, one has to win. So because at times the vision and agenda the agenda may be the same, but vision not. So we may want the same thing, we all want to build a company, for example, but another wants to be biggest, another want to be the best. Now we both want companies, but our visions are different. So same with business and politics. We may have the same ideology to say want to further a certain agenda, but how we then go about it may then differ from in terms of which part you come from or which weighs more according to you. Yeah.
So when you say that sometimes one has to take one for the team, one has to win in certain instances, whether it's politics or it's business. Looking at the business structure and the history or the business of history or the history of business in Zimbabwe, it seems to me that maybe business has been taking quite the hit and has been taking a lot for the team, and politics seems to be winning in that game.
Yeah, to some extent, yes. But some of these things, well, for us on the grass level, really, there's not much you can do. There's a certain that you can do, but at the end of the day, a lot happens on at the top, because that is where the decisions are actually made, right? And yes, a lot has been taken by the business side, taking one for the team in order at times to cool political rivalry, to cool furthering of certain agendas, to pursue certain agendas and thrive in different ways. Now, at the same time, at times it's difficult for us to implement some of these things because, you know what, the nature and the state of our economy, it's different. You know, for example, there are certain policies, like recently Mtuli increased VAT
yes,
by 0.5%, right? So you can already see that, okay, in this aspect, a certain element of revenue has to be increased, but at the same time, at whose cost? So it's trying to strike a balance, really. You find that teachers don't have to pay duty for their vehicles and all that. And my question will be, okay, how much do they even get paid for them to be exempted? It's a political move, yes, but...
yes. I get that.
It's making policy changes, it's making strides, but how impactful are they at the end of the day? Yeah.
So looking at business and politics, I think it is true that the two are interlinked. We really cannot talk about business without talking about politics. We can't talk about politics without talking about business. So when you look at a lot of countries, and even in our country particularly, for a lot of business people and a lot of businesses, they try to stay as further away from politics as they can. Why do you think this is so?
No, it's very important. Let's not get it confused here. Just because they're intertwined does not mean that you shouldn't separate. Right? One can have a political career and at the same time have a personal
business
career,
empire,
and stuff like that. So just because you can't separate the politics and the business are together, it doesn't mean you shouldn't separate the two, because at the end of the day, business is business and politics is politics. There is, however, a point whereby it shall be interlinked. It's inevitable. However, it's very important to try and not blur the line and try to be distinct as much as possible, and allow your brand or your business to be as independent as possible. Talking from a business perspective, you know, at times for particularly in business, some people may not disclose probably their political association. Not that there's anything wrong with whosoever they've aligned with, but they don't have to billboard it, because it might affect engagements and interactions. So it's just a matter of safeguarding relations, and at times not making it look like people are behaving a certain way because they're associated to a certain party. So for me, it's very, very important to keep business as business and as independent as possible. Even if you're politically aligned, I mean, everyone is politically aligned at the end of the day, really. So that's neither here nor there who you're politically aligned with, but try and maintain an independent business image and profile as possible.
Why do you think that is important? Making sure that your business is independent of your political affiliations or like thereof.
This is mainly for the success of your business. You know, there are certain people, you automatically inherit business or lose business because of your association. Generally, that's how life is. At times, if you announce I'm friends with so and so, automatically hatred is hotspotted. Like Bluetooth.
Like just like that.
Just like that. So for your own business contracts, and there are certain people that will say, I do not work with a company that is not politically aligned, right? So they are not saying you shouldn't be, but you shouldn't publicly be, because it's inevitable for you to not associate to any political party. It's either you're here or you're here.
Okay.
Right. So at the end of the day, for me, it's got nothing to do with your association, but everything to do with your disclosing.
That's very interesting.
Yeah.
That's very interesting.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, you are somewhere. You are definitely somewhere.
So So looking at Zimbabwe, with the social upheavals, with the political upheavals, we talk of the early 2000s, the land grabs thereof, we talk of Operation Mrambatsvina, we talk of 2008, we talk of even recently we've had the August killings, we've had so much political upheavals in the last 2 decades of our in the existence of our nation. What does that do to business, or rather investment, and especially when we look at foreign direct investment?
Okay, so in as far as foreign direct investment, the moment you increase political risk, you have increased operational risk and stability and your operations. What am I saying? So the moment your politics is not stable, like let's look at South Africa currently, their politics is not stable.
Yes.
And what's happening to the rand? It's declining, right? So it is inevitable for that link to be there. So the moment there is no stability in as far as politics, because politics is the leadership of the nation, of the country. So the moment the leaders are not gelling well together, who knows what can happen? Because at the end of the day, they are the ones that have the upper hand in changing policies, introducing new legislation, regulation, and all that. And all that is now at stake. They can wake up and decide, like the VAT we spoke about, that automatically affects the operations of the business. So because of that political instability, business risk is increased. So you increase political risk, business risk is increased. And the moment there's high political risk, people do not want to invest. Why? They don't want to lose their money. You get what I'm saying?
Yes.
And in as far as foreign direct investment, so people with money locally will start to flee and go outside the country. If you remember the exodus to Western countries, yes, because of political instability, socio-economic instabilities, and so forth. So the moment there is that instability, you are automatically affecting your business operations. And no one ever wants to invest to lose their money. I'd rather keep my dollar than invest it in a place where I have no assurance that I'm going to get it back. Even if with the rule of time value of money invested, but if my principal is not secure, then investment is out of the picture. So you've lost local confidence. You have people moving out and possibly investing outside the country. I've heard people speaking of buying houses in South Africa, in Dubai, and all those other places. And then those in the outside world, your foreign direct investment, they have no interest in coming in because there's already chaos on the ground. Yeah.
So how then does it feel when you're a business person like you are, and the economy is so volatile and the political situation is also quite unstable? How does that feel, being a business person in Zimbabwe?
Do you know what? I think it then reduces the number of people that want to take risks because you now want to be safe. So you find that your business people, chances are they're working with the bare minimum, trying to cut costs by all means possible. They want to suck the system dry before the system sucks them dry, because it's like, okay, it's not stable, so let me gather as much as I can right now before everything is taken away from me, which is a coping mechanism. Call it toxic, call it whatsoever, but it's a coping mechanism. One has to be eaten somewhere in the equation, whether it's you or me, but one is surviving. Okay. So you then get to be put on defense mode, and a few people are willing to take risks, and those that are they're cutting corners as much as they can.
That really makes it harder, even when we look for the person on the ground, the ordinary citizen of Zimbabwe, who then has to be maybe play in the middle ground between those people, the investor, and then the person with the business, and then truly decides, okay, we're increasing VAT, and then I'm an ordinary person in Zimbabwe, that actually means that the business person will also say, I'm also increasing prices for my goods.
They transfer the risk onto you.
Yes, and then so it just makes it so hard to live in Zimbabwe as well. So my next question would be, you obviously work for the formal sector, but you also have interest in the informal sector. What would you say about, what are your opinions on the labor laws of Zimbabwe?
It's quite broad. Maybe what aspects, to be precise?
Particularly looking at the issue of sexual harassment, because as a woman and as a young, ambitious woman, or even the older woman, most of us have faced sexual harassment in different aspects. And the workplace, according to statistics, is actually one place where a lot of the sexual harassment abuses take place. So do you think that when we look at the current labor laws, is it enough? Are we as women, or even as men, because men also do face sexual harassment, is the current Labor Act that is there enough to protect people in a working setup?
I think there's a loophole in the system somehow. Why do I say that? According to the Labor Act 8H, the sexual harassment is under unfair legal practice. So it's not a standalone, right? So such that at the end of the day, sexual harassment is then transferred to the company's responsibility to further break it down to say, according to your organizational constitution, what is constitution policies, what is sexual harassment? Because in the Labor Act, it is not explicitly defined that this is sexual harassment. It just falls under the category of unfair labor practice. So when your boss fires you, that's unfair. When you steal, that's unfair. When you are sick and you have no sick note, that's unfair. And sexual harassment is also unfair. It's in that bracket. So by the mere fact that it doesn't have a standalone section where it is explicitly defined that this is what sexual harassment is, there's a loophole in the system there. So however, it then takes a step further, which makes it difficult. Why do I say that? Because that company policy is only binding when there is a contract between employer and employee. So the moment there is no contract, it's not binding. And my question is, how many people do have contracts in the workplace to start with? So at the end of the day, because the Act doesn't specify what sexual harassment is, and chances are you do not have a contract of employment, you cannot then take your employer to court using their policy, because their policy is only binding with the contract, which leaves so many loopholes, both in the workplace and also in the Act.
And in some formal spaces, they don't even have sexual harassment policies to begin with as well. So when we then look at the maternity leave and maternity aspect of the labor laws, what are your thoughts and opinions on that? Okay,
so on this one, there's a lack of alignment between the Constitution of 2013 and Section 18 of the Act in as far as maternity leave. So the Constitution will say that it's an absolute right for a female employee to have 98 days, which is an equivalent of 3 months, leave. And that leave is paid for. So 3 months you're away, we still pay you your salary, right? That is what the Constitution says. However, the Act is more economic in Section 18 to say, okay, you need to have worked for at least a year for you to be entitled to that 3 months or 98 days, which makes economic sense because I can't employ you today and tomorrow you're away for 3 months and I have to pay you your salary. Now think about it. At the same time, the Act further says you can only be paid for maternity leave for 3 times at 2-year interval. So you can't have a baby this year and a baby next year and we pay you. So if it's less than a 2-year interval, then we can't pay you, because now, Kona, think about it. As you are away, someone has to fill your space. So that means it's your salary and that person's salary at times, right? Which becomes expensive for the company in terms of operations is concerned. And remember, it doesn't only apply to public companies, also private companies. And private companies are in the business of making business, right? So imagine paying someone and they're not at work for justified reasons. Of course, they're on maternity leave, and it's okay. It's natural. We're not going to discriminate. However, that 2-year interval, so they can give you maternity leave, 2-year interval for 3 babies only. When it's going to 4th, 5th, upwards, it's now unpaid leave. So you can go on leave, but it's then unpaid. At the same time, it's then at the discretion of your employer as well to say what is their company policy in as far as maternity leave is concerned. In as much as company policy and what the Constitution and Act says, it has to align at the end of the day. For example, the Constitution can't say maternity leave is illegal and you say my workers are not going to have maternity leave. By virtue of operating in that country, you're obliged to follow the constitutional laws of that particular country. So there has to be a sort of like a synergy and alignment between company and national constitution and acts and all that.
So, you know, I want to bring you back a little bit when you're talking about the issue of saying some people, especially in Zimbabwe, we work without contracts. And I was just reminded of a certain conversation that I was having with one of my colleagues, and they were talking about the issue of saying how young people fail to negotiate for better salaries. And then I was just making the argument to say that in Zimbabwe, finding an actual job in itself is very hard. And then when you then find the job, where do you get the nerve to then say that I am negotiating? No, the 500 that you're offering me is not enough. And the 600, maybe 600 would be better. This just goes on to show how maybe the political situation in Zimbabwe then boils down to ordinary people like us, and how it then just affects, you know, the economy and how we get employed, or how most of us are not employed at the end of the day. So when we look at Spain recently introduced and gazetted what they call menstruation leave, which is to say that any female can take 3 days of paid leave every month, and they don't have to produce a doctor's note to say that they are sick. They don't have to explain much. They just have to tell you that, hey, Mr. Man or Madam, I'm taking a leave because I'm not feeling well. So when you then look at that from a business perspective, is that sustainable? Is that something that's viable from a business perspective?
I would say yes. Why? Remember, Spain also mentioned that you also have to cover up for those 3 days. So they're not saying take 3 days and forget about it. They're saying, okay, now that you are not well, right, it's okay, take some time off. However, pay back that time. So maybe it can inconvenience operations, maybe on a day that you're particularly needed for a board meeting, decisions have to be made. Probably it might affect business in that way. However, in as far as time and time which is supposed to be put in by the employee, it's still okay. For me, the equation balances, really. It balances.
And you know what's amazing about this conversation is that Spain recently gazetted this, but when we look at countries like Zambia, they've heard this for years. And Zambia is an African country.
Yeah.
And when you look at the stereotype of African countries, and especially when we talk about menstruation, and especially these are taboo topics. People don't talk about this in the public aspect and public arena of things. But this also then brings me to a senator in another African country who recently went to parliament with stent trousers, and it caused an uproar, and is still causing an uproar even right now. When I look at those developments, when I learn about those countries, I'm so much happy because I see that there are certain policies and maybe even people, certain policies in politics that then really boil down to a legislative that then, you know, is happy as well. Take for instance, I'm a woman, I work formally, and you know, menstruation leave has been gazetted and I can take 3 days off. That's something that I can be happy about as well. So what would you then say as a business person yourself and as a woman specifically, what would you say is the importance of having policies and laws that understand that are acceptable when we look at employees and the general populace to speak of?
I think it is very, very important. Why do I say that? Because the issue of, speaking of the senator in Kenya, the issue of menstrual stigma to some African continents, it's very fortunate that in Zimbabwe, in as much as we are not a first world country, we are up to date with some of these issues. Of course, period poverty is a thing, but then the stigma around it, really, and as far as Zimbabwe, in the Zimbabwean context is concerned, we don't have much stigma around it. However, bring about that awareness, you know, because I'm not supposed to feel less of a human because of that. Why do I say so? It's something that is natural. I didn't call it upon myself, and above all, I didn't ask to be a girl child, a powerful girl child after all. And so at the end of the day, reducing the stigma is very, very, very important, and having conversations around it that encourage the girl child, you know, that allows the girl child to feel normal and not feel like, okay, there's something wrong with you, this is totally abnormal. So I feel like such situations, conversations around it, and I can say one person in particular I know from Blawayo, Period Box, she has conversation, if you follow her page, she has conversation on how to use a tampon, how to use pads, just to create those conversations, pull away the stigma. And guess what? It's not a conversations for ladies to have.
True.
Gentlemen should also be part of the conversation because we live with them at the end of the day, and they are part of those that make the legislation. So how do they make an informed decision from a place of lack of knowledge, right? So they have to be informed. So when I also talk about financial literacy, in as much as I advocate for women independence, I feel like we have to build a society and a community, because at the end of the day, with some of these issues, it takes a village. It's not our own responsibility as women, in as much as we're able to do it, but we need the support of our men.
Yes, I hope and that the men are watching out, they heard your last sentence. We need your support because, you know, we live with you. We share the society. So, you know, it's important that we share those conversations as well. So lastly, what do you think about the issue of providing free menstruation pads or free sanitary pads to schoolgirls, or really rather providing them to everyone that menstruates?
From a humanitarian side, I will have to break my answer into two. From a humanitarian side, I would say let's give these young ladies, because at the end of the day, nature has called them and there's nothing to do about it. But at the same time, looking at it from the economic perspective, is that doable? Because I can't then recommend something that is not economically sound, talking from the business side. I feel giving for free where we are right now as a country, we may not be able to provide. However, to subsidize, I think we can, because a lot has been done for different sectors. I mean, when you're having a tractor come into the country because it's in the agricultural sector, you don't have to pay duty and all the other import duties on certain raw materials, you know. So to reduce menstrual poverty, both in rural and urban areas, if we could have it subsidized. Free, I wouldn't be over ambitious on it. However, to be subsidized, I think it wouldn't be too much to ask from the business community to say.
So in conclusion, what are some of the policies that you'd like to see the legislature or the legislative people, when we look at the ministers and the members of parliament, what are some of the policies and laws that you'd like to see them making in terms of concerning the business world or how business is done in Zimbabwe?
I think my contribution would mainly be in line with 6H, unfair labor practice. Let's have a clause of sexual harassment on its own, because the way it's gradually changing, you know, how it's done, the whole sexual harassment in the workplace. At times it's really not tapping your confidential parts as you pass. So it is very important, I think, to really expand on it and allow it to be a standalone, because I feel like it's a topic of great magnitude, which should be given a certain element of attention, because at the end of the day, certain people don't get to walk into certain rooms because they didn't allow themselves to volunteer their bodies, right? Certain people don't get to sit on certain boards because they did not agree to have a hotel meeting instead of a coffee shop meeting, right? Many people did not make it to certain committees or get certain promotions because they just decided, you know what, it's not a quid pro quo with my body or with what you want. At the end of the day, really, it's not about indulging. It's about the inappropriate touches, inappropriate conversations. That's harassment on its own. And we need to govern that so that at the end of the day, in the workplace, I do not work out of fear. Because most people are depressed out here because they lost the one job that could have given their career a pivot it needed just because they didn't give in.
And that's a sad reality.
Yeah, so it just goes beyond just indulging. It's about someone's career that has been dented for decades to come, that didn't get a fair opportunity and chance, that didn't get the pivot or the push it needed at the right time. And let's make this clear. It's not only women that are affected. Our counterparts, male, are also affected in as much as the rates may differ. However, they are not totally out to say, okay, they are not affected by this at all. They are actually very much affected. They are, but then at the end of the day, more attention is paid to the female, which is well earned at the end of the day, because we were oppressed for some time, but I think we should strike a balance.
I think I have a feminist in studio today.
Not quite.
Anyway, Sharon, thank you very much for having come here and having... I feel like this is one of my favorite episodes. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say that, but you know, your knowledge and your wisdom in so many issues, especially on the issue of business and politics, has really been something that, you know, I've enjoyed listening to. So thank you very much for making time. I know you're a very, very busy woman because you're busy chasing the bag, you know, securing it. So thank you very much for having come here and made time.
No, thank you for hosting me, and thank you for having interest in what I have to say on certain topical issues that affect us as women and the business side and in our general businesses.
Wow, I think we're just ending that on a very beautiful note. She's smiling, I'm smiling, and I'm sure whoever's watching is smiling as well. So thank you very much for having joined us for another episode of the show On Her Throne. This has been your Queen, Unika Intombiyengiyago Kombora. Remember to follow me on your social media pages. I am at Queen Unika on Instagram and on Twitter. So see you definitely next week on Thursday at the same time, same place. Cheers!